very good afternoon, and thank you so much for having taken the time to join the webinar. My name is Jay Reddy. I'm with the Identity Access Management team here at Management. Guys, thank you so much for having taken the time. You early birds are start off today's webinar with a quick audio video check. If you're able to hear me loud and clear, all right? Just drop me a message right now or raise your hands and I know that my audio is working fine. And if you can see my screen that says NIST password policy recommendations. That's the topic for today's presentation. We are going to have an interesting session today and we hope that you get the session. So I want to make sure that we get the information conveyed right. So just a quick audio video check for you guys before we get started. Lovely, thank you so much. Can I see your screen? Okay, I'm receiving messages saying that you can't see my screen. Just give me one quick second while I try get that fixed. Just a quick second. All right, I hope you're able to see my screen right now. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Albert, Keith, Kathleen, Melissa, all of you. Thank you so much. You have been very lovely. Thank you so much. All good right now. So yeah, today's webinar is around NIST password policies and recommendations given by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Over the course of years, NIST has been around for almost about 120 years now, if I were to get that right. I think I've got that right. Yes, they've been around for quite some time now, and they've become the go-to institution for anything around cybersecurity. They started off consulting major federal agencies like the FBI, the CIA, the NHS, and so on and so forth. And then once these guidelines turned out to be quite critical and, with respect to what these institutions started following, there were other organizations that followed suit, and not just the federal agencies. Companies around the world, took interest in the NIST password guidelines and started adopting them as well. NIST has not just given out password guidelines. There's quite a lot that's happened. I've got a detailed NIST cybersecurity framework, just in case if you'd be interested. Drop me a message towards the end of the webinar and I'll give you the NIST cybersecurity framework. That being said, the webinar today is being recorded. Just in case if you have any questions popping up during the course of the webinar, feel free to shoot your questions then and there, and I'd be more than happy to take your questions as they come. Lovely, I've got all the housekeeping out of the way. Let's get started. So today as we speak, all right, there's this huge quantum shift that has happened. A lot of us are working remotely and we keep hearing about the new normal all the time. Now, we'll have to understand that there are fundamental changes to how organizations are going to operate now and in the future. As we see it, it looks like a perfectly happy organization. Everybody is working from office. Things are absolutely under control. As administrators, as security leaders, we have been used to the whole idea of working from office for quite some time now, and all of our policies, especially around security, are as well aligned towards it. For example, network security, that's something that we've taken enough concern over the years and we've kind of fine-tuned the whole thing and we have it under complete control. But now people have started working remotely, and that brings us to the point where attackers are taking notice of this one aspect, and then what they're trying to do is they're trying to make the best use of this opportunity. One basic concern that all of us IT folks right now have is, can we trust our users enough? Can we let them work with our systems just the way they used to work? Do we make our whole system foolproof? Because basically one major challenge is your users are not just bringing their own devices to your network right now when they're working remotely, they're also bringing their own vulnerabilities along with them. There are 100 different parameters in this new equation of remote working that can make things a little sketchy for organizations, and can make it really easy for attackers to get in and start manipulating your users. Essentially, what we've observed is over the last couple of months, I've been speaking to a lot of administrators, and one common challenge is getting your users to follow these best practices, as we say. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and break it down for you to understand what essentially would an attacker be doing and how exactly can you follow these guidelines to help yourself against all of that. All right. We'll start off with certain basic questions, fundamental questions through the webinar. Please don't mind if I sound a little paranoid because things are like that, and we want to be extra secure, double sure about whatever we are doing. So I've got another infographic right here that says the same. So the last slide we just saw how attackers want to take advantage of that one vulnerability. Your users can be the weakest link in your security. So please do understand that, and we'll move forward with that understanding in mind. Microsoft went on to make this infographic. It very clearly states that if one of your users' accounts is compromised, all right, it could be Active Directory, it could be Office 365, doesn't matter. If one of those accounts is compromised, even before you know, within a span of 2 days, the domain admin credentials can be compromised. That is a huge possibility. That being said, that's not even half of the concern right here. The major concern is what follows. We're talking about attackers taking advantage of the situation, the whole deal of remote working and the chaos that is associated with it, and starting to exfiltrate data afterward. Now, it's been almost about 100 days since we went into a lockdown here in India from where I'm presenting today. It's almost been about 100 days, like I told you, and there are about 8,000 folks in my company who are working remotely. That's a huge number for remote working, and the admin is having a tough time in general, not just our company, around the world, having tough time keeping track of things, the data that's transferred left, right, center, and how do you keep tab if an attacker snooped in 100 days ago and they're exfiltrating data already? It's almost impossible to find out this needle in the haystack. So it becomes all the more easy for the attackers to not tip off any radar, do a good job exfiltrating data, and take complete control over this situation and leave your instance even without leaving a track. That's the biggest challenge. So one recommendation that I want to start off today's webinar is this. We spoke to a lot of administrators, we spoke to a lot of security experts. All of them agree that it's going to take longer than before. If you want to do a root cause analysis, if you want to find out if there's an attacker residing in your system doing some havoc, it becomes all the more difficult given these innumerable parameters that keep changing dynamically as we speak in a remote setup. So almost about 68% of the breaches that had happened in the last couple of months have taken quite some time to be even discovered. So that being said, start treating and acknowledging the possibility that you can already be under an attack as you're attending the webinar today. That's a possibility that you'll start needing to acknowledge. Once you do that, you have a lot of other infographics and a lot of other research that backs that up, and you can start realigning your perspective to cybersecurity, which is the very agenda of today's webinar, trying to see how can we get that one line of defense, our password security, geared up. So infographic right here again points out the same thing. There's been a tremendous surge in the number of phishing attacks that have happened. You might ask me, how would our users fall prey for phishing attacks? Phishing attacks are age old. Some way or the other, your users are trained, they're educated, they don't click on malicious looking emails. But turns out the answer is no. I have data that proves that in the last couple of months, the highest attacks that were initiated on an organization were either business email compromise attacks done via a phishing attack. That's what is happening all around the world. And most of these attacks are themed COVID. So they pretend to be an email from the World Health Organization or the CDC, and then they get your users to click on these emails. Most of the times, these emails get sent to your user's personal account, all right? Now, you must be asking me this question, how does that matter if it's going to be on the personal account? Now, like I pointed out earlier, that's the same account, that's the same device your users are going to access their personal accounts from and their work accounts from. And even before you know, they probably, when bringing their own device, if one of those links contain the malware, that can start penetrating into your corporate network. So we're talking about a serious situation right here where it becomes very, very difficult to contain the damage that it could cause unless your users are rightly educated. So another classic case is what had happened to me personally a couple of weeks back. This was about 2-3 weeks back when I received an email from the government. It looked very legitimate. It said the government, so on and so forth, that the government is giving away a financial incentive to help people around the country. In fact, they timed it really, really well in alignment with the actual announcement that the government had made. They pretended to be the government. They gave a very legitimate looking website, a link to a website where all I had to do was fill out a couple of basic details, such as social security number, and look like a very legitimate site, a couple of other bank details. And even before you know, a lot of people, I knew it was a spam email the moment I saw it, but a lot of people fell prey for it. And even before the government could take control of the situation, enough damage was done. So one thing over and over that I want to stress right now is credential compromise, and that has become an infodemic. We have one pandemic out there. We just can't go on with this infodemic out there compromising users' credentials. So you have to set processes to understand that account takeovers are a reality. They keep happening as we speak. And essentially, given the fact that it's not just Active Directory accounts anymore, we're talking about collaboration applications. We're talking about Office 365 and gearing up to speed and getting all your users on board to all these new cloud applications just so that they can collaborate. All of that boils down to extra identities for your users. New identities for your users equals new passwords. New passwords equals more opportunity for an attacker to attack, more threat surface area, more attack surface area. And somewhere or the other, attacks keep happening. One or the other user falls prey for this, because your attackers, the ones that we're talking about right now, are extremely smart in engineering your users. We call it socially engineering users. They identify the right user. They know that they're vulnerable. They have this best business lingo in their emails and their communications, even in the telephone calls. They get your users to give away what information that they want. It could be information, it could be intellectual property, it could even be money that gets wired wrongly. So we are talking about attackers who are extremely meticulous about what they do. So account takeovers are a reality, and understanding it all starts with gaining access to your account is the crux to it. I just put together a simple kill chain right here as to what follows what, so that you can understand if you're doing like a quick evaluation of an attack or trying to do a root cause analysis, this is what usually happens. They gain control, they establish access, and then they do a complete reconnaissance to understand what's important. They start exfiltrating data, they complete their machine, they erase their tracks, and they leave off. That's how attackers work. So my first recommendation for you is a very simple one. Start tracking logon activity for your users. Essentially, while you're working remotely, all your user logon activity has to be tracked undoubtedly. Why would I say this? It might seem like a very simple recommendation. Logon activity, what's the big deal right there? Already I have an AD event viewer that has event data for logon activity, but then have you turned on auditing for logon activity is the first question that I want to ask you. The next one is, with the quantum of transactions that occur day in, day out with an environment like Active Directory or any other identity platform, it becomes almost impossible to identify that one malicious event, that one origin point, and that's the crux right here. So what I have right here is a couple of cases basically that you can better understand if you have logon activity tracking enabled. I'll have the first case walk you through. All right, brute force attack. All right, so let's assume a situation where there are a couple of logon failures, repetitive logon failures, and then a while later there was this one successful logon, and then sometime later what had happened was one of the servers got accessed, and a day-to-day operation was going on, and finally after a while, in one of those servers that was accessed, an application got installed, and in a while later, there was, since all users are working remotely, it almost becomes impossible to spot if any data is being sent back and forth. Some data packets were sent back and forth from that server. Now, when I say it like that, it seems like a normal day-to-day operation. Logon failures, great, happens all the time. Successful logon, perfect, a normal thing. Applications being installed, no doubt, a normal thing. Again, data being sent, yeah, nothing big about that. But when I put it together, connect the dots, weave it into a story and get some context to it and say it like this. There were repetitive logon failures, to be precise, 100 repetitive logon failures that happened in under 1 minute, followed by one successful logon from that same very IP, accessing a critical file server where your corporate data was stored or some intellectual property was there. And then on that very same server, a malware was installed. It was an application that got triggered for the first time ever. And that application started sending out data packs to an external network. So when I say it like that, it makes a lot of difference, right? So the same situation, the same set of events, when put together, when correlated, when you connect the dots, does make a lot of difference. And it all boils down to you being able to monitor logon activity and not just stop right there, but then add a little context to it. Build that story. So you have to start looking for solutions that get that in picture, because NIST basically recommends you to keep track of logon activity. Essentially, if it's user identities that we're talking about, logon activity tracking is fundamental. So while you're looking for a solution, look for one that is proactive in giving you context like the one that I just described. And going a little further, we are also going to be talking about what happens while users are working remotely and the whole deal with island hopping. Now, island hopping is a classic case. Once the credentials or passwords are compromised, the first fall takes place. And after that, you know how Active Directory is. With just read privileges in Active Directory, once an account is compromised, you'd be able to get a ton of information on who else is there in the network, where is the domain admin, who is the domain admin, what are the users or list of users, so on and so forth, with just read privileges. LDAP queries, basic LDAP queries can get you a long way. And along the process, the attacker also exfiltrates data, tries to get hold of more domains, more endpoints, and so on and so forth. It keeps happening until finally the domain admin credential is compromised. And even before you know, your entire network security is down. So this is the same thing that the Microsoft infographic also pointed out. Just one access point, and even before you know, they laterally move, get as much as information as possible, get as much as foothold as possible, leave no tracks. And even if they leave tracks, it becomes really impossible to find, because there is you keep looking for them all over the place. Not just one account that got compromised, a whole ton of account got compromised. So what do? You start realizing that this is a problem. In fact, like I spoke to you a while back, we ran surveys, we spoke to administrators, and 50+% of them, in all of the cases, IT managers, senior security leaders, all of them understand that this is a big threat, especially given the fact that a lot of us are fast-tracked into Office 365. This is becoming a bigger problem all the more. In fact, around October last year, if I'm not wrong, in 2019, October, the Department of Homeland Security had to step in to give away best practices for Office 365 migration. Now, that's not very far from now. Far from now. That was about some 6-7 months back. And the Department of Homeland Security had to give away these recommendations, basically because a lot of organizations, even before the pandemic hit, when they were trying to do the migration, they did not check a lot of important security checkbox when they moved their data or when they built an hybrid system. And that turned out to be a major cause for a lot of security compromises. It becomes easy when things are on the cloud. It becomes easy when you have multiple touch points or access points for these accounts. Because what we'll need to bottom line understand is, end of the day, your identities are no longer within your perimeter. Your identities are turning to become your very perimeter. Because as I speak, I personally have 10 different accounts and 10 different applications that I access day in, day out. I have 10 different passwords. Do I go about remembering all of that? That's the biggest challenge. And like I told you, my first touch point is my identity itself. And if an attacker wants to enter into your system, it's not your network that they're concerned about any longer, because nobody is at work. What's the big deal with the network? We are talking about identities that are all over the place that they can take control of and start compromising. And hence, I thought it makes sense for us to use the NIST regulations or the NIST guidelines and apply them to the current password policies that we have and see how can we fortify our current security. That is pretty much the agenda for today's session. We'll get started. So NIST, like I told you, they're an organization. They've been out there for quite some time. Federal agencies do follow their guidelines, and other organizations have also started following their password standards. All right. If you want to quickly look up, you can always look up for the NIST cybersecurity framework. In case if you want me to send it out, I can do the NIST cybersecurity framework, send it out. It's called NIST SP 863. That might seem like a lot of information, but I'll have that emailed to you just in case if you need. So the cybersecurity framework is basically aimed at improving the critical infrastructure inside every organization that's out there. All right, it's a 55-page document. You can go through it. What I've done is I've kind of consolidated the key points from that and I've put them together. All right, let's get started with the password recommendation. So passwords have been there for quite some time now. It says 60 years old right now on the slide, maybe after IT came, but passwords have existed since time immemorial. We've been used to the idea of having clues. We've been used to the idea of having secret questions. And the biggest challenge is it's not evolved much as a technology after a point in time. Maybe if I were to give you a time frame in the last 20 years, there's not been much of an upgrade in the whole password realm, because essentially when it comes to identity management or identity access management or identity providers, be it Microsoft or be it any cloud applications that are out there, password security has to an extent taken a back seat. So it's quite obvious that passwords are here to stay. People keep talking about passwords going off, a passwordless future and so on and so forth. That's been in talks for almost about 10 years now. Way back in 2004, I remember Bill Gates saying passwords are going to be replaced with other factors, but still it didn't really happen. The change did not happen because passwords are encrypted. Passwords are very cost efficient. You do not require an additional hardware to set up the whole thing up. And again, if something goes wrong, you can always reset the password and they're backward compatible. So these are certain basic advantages and we've laid that out clearly. But though passwords can scale, though passwords are inevitable, are they secure enough is the question. Active Directory password policies haven't been changed in the last 2 decades. And that's a major problem for organizations that are working right now. Especially if you're working remotely, that's something that you have to be concerned. Now, if you have an argument saying, now there's default domain policies, Jay, we have the GPOs, we have the SecPol editor where you can go and customize the policy, so on and so forth. Even if you're concerned about the fine-grained password policies, trust me, it is not as fine-grained as it claims. There are innate limitations to how it's been structured, and that's the reason why we thought it makes sense for us to understand what are the NIST guidelines and have them incorporated into a tool. That's the agenda right here. So we're looking at certain basic problems or fundamental problems that have been, plaguing organizations for quite some time now, because this is publicly available information and attackers can very well take advantage of the situation. It starts with something as basic as one size fits it all. That's been the approach for quite some time now. And if you want to go forward doing one size fits it all for all your users, not discriminate your users that way, I think that could be a challenge that we need to start addressing, because you have different stakeholders in the organization that require different level of security. So we cannot proceed with one size fits all approach. And another major problem is the whole deal with password fatigue. I'll be talking about that in a bit, and I'll tell you how one size fits it all can ruin that for you. Another major problem is incremental passwords. Now, for a very long time, we've been told that resetting passwords, frequently makes the whole idea of password security better. But turns out NIST says the exact opposite thing. NIST recommends you not to reset your passwords frequently. In fact, if you can completely get away or get rid of password expiry as a concept, because fundamentally what happens is when users are forced to reset their passwords with time, all right, the challenge right here is to get them to set the right strong password every time. They end up doing an incremental password almost all the time. I personally have done incremental passwords a few years back. When you don't really recognize what is going on or realize what's going on in the background, you do not know the criticality of it, you end up just adding a number to it, thinking that you got away with it. You had a favorite password, you did not want to forget it, you used it for a long time, and you just kept adding numbers to it or doing like a sequence to it. It becomes really difficult to curtail or curb an incremental password. All along I had password at 123. All I had to do was add another 4 to it, and my new password is password at 1234. How many of us joining today can with all certainty say your users do not have a password like that? Password at 123. One of the most commonly used passwords last year. In 2019, in 2018, the year before that, it's always been either I love you or password at 123. Does your existing Active Directory password policy with all the granularity applied, with all the policies applied, stop your users from using that? The simple answer is no. We have to start looking outward. We have to start thinking of what more can we do. And it all again circles back to certain other basic problems, dictionary words. Now, dictionary words are the most fundamental filter that any password policy system should have. Now, users tend to set words that are recognizable, that they can remember, that are easy to remember. And most of the times, it's also easy for the attackers to use one of those bots to initiate an attack. And even before you know, it's definitely not a fair war. because attackers on one side are growing day in day out with respect to the sophistication of the tools that they use or the technology that they have to back them up when they're initiating an attack. But all we are left with is a 20-year-old password policy. What do we do? So these are fundamental problems that we need to address, in addition to one more major concern, which is users. The security of your organization is only as strong as the weakest link, like I always say. And in this equation, the weakest link is our users. Now, we had users who had written their passwords on a piece of paper or a sticky note and had it stuck right on top of their desktop. So how do we expect to get the whole deal of password policies set right and your users to follow the whole thing if we had? That's the reason why we thought foolproofing it is important, because we keep hearing about attacks all the time. We keep hearing about a password spray attack. Now, this is not a brute force attack. This is a little more smarter than a brute force attack. The attacker picks one weak password and tries it across all accounts in the organization, and turns out many instances, at least one of the other account in your organization cracks open. And even before you know, your entire security comes crumbling down. So what do we do? You have the NIST recommendations right here. They're saying passwords should at least be 8 characters long. In fact, how I see it, they're like more the merrier. The password guidelines suggest 8 characters can be the minimum when it's set by a human, and a 6-character minimum if it's automated. This is what they're saying. But even if you're doing an automated password setup or a random password generator, or you're using a tool like that, I'd still recommend to go with 8 at least. All right, you can encourage your users to have lengthy passwords because they are definitely much more stronger than the normal ones. We call it password entropy. So with every additional character or letter or number or special character, what happens is the difficulty of guessing the password becomes exponentially higher. So that's something that you can definitely do. So more the merrier. I definitely ask you or suggest you to set or get your users to set longer passwords beyond 8 characters. If you can do longer passwords, nothing better than that. And then the next one is around removing the whole idea of password resets. I'll get there and I'll talk about why is it critical. And then there's always this problem of complexity being king. Okay, all along we've been told stronger the password. In fact, I have been talking about and lobbying for complex passwords, but NIST says that there are chances that if there are complex passwords that can get your users to go through password fatigue, and they can set the same password across all platforms. Even if it's a complex password, if it's compromised, it's compromised, right? You don't want other accounts to be compromised too. So you have to handle it with a pinch of salt. So what complexity is the right amount of complexity? Because it boils down to this battle where it is always about usability versus security. So how do you deal that? So what I have for you is a simple password policy strengthener, as I call it. What we've done is we've kind of broken down these NIST best practices and we've incorporated right into the tool. When it comes to these NIST regulations, certain fundamental understanding that you need to have is the dictionary words that we just spoke about being one critical recommendation that I had, not using dictionary words. So that's pre-built right into the tool. So you can very clearly say your users will be restricted from using any word that is from the dictionary. Very simple, very straightforward, outright. You're immediately reducing the probability of a dictionary attack to 0 if you have a strong dictionary associated with the product. So very simple, very straightforward. So is the case with patterns. So our users are very predictable. Trust me, even the best of the best are still very predictable, because we did research with one of the organizations out there, an analyst firm, and we figured there are only 400 different behavioral patterns for users, within which almost all of them fall, needless to say. Even if they think they set the most complex passwords, they have a pattern one way or the other, and users become accustomed to these patterns over time, and they're very, very predictable. Humans are very, very predictable. So what you can do is you can start by disallowing patterns. It stops major deals of portions with respect to users doing a keyboard waltz. A lot of them do that. I do that. I've done that in the past, where you say QWERTY, QWERTY, or 1, 2, 3, 4. How do you stop them from using such patterns? The tool can become a little smart in being a little proactive also. If you define certain patterns to the tool can become smart and stop any pattern that is even similar to that. We're talking about stopping users from using maybe their first name, their last name, any word from their name, any word that is mildly relevant to the name of the organization, stuff like that. So we have a very detailed recommendation for you with respect to how you can go about stopping users from using patterns. You can always reach out to me and I'll give you the recommendations for patterns that go right here. What do you set as conditions? You can very much do that. And we also spoke about incremental passwords, right? What if you can completely stop your users from using any characters from your previous password? Now, that absolutely stops an incremental password. So 5 consecutive characters from your username, you can stop. 2 consecutive or 5 consecutive or 10 consecutive characters from your previous password, you can stop. You can disallow them totally. So this is not password history that we're talking about, because history does not cover that. We're talking about stopping users from using a password or that has characters from the previous password. You can very much set that with the password policy strengthener. On top of it, like I just recommended, and so did NIST, long passwords, or as they're called, passphrases, are always recommended over all of these other factors. So please, if you can get your users to do passphrases, nothing better than that. Still, if something goes wrong, like I told you, even if you set the strongest of the strong passwords, passwords are only as secure as your user. So what if they give away a password, or get to a malicious site and enter the password, or they're scammed and the password is extorted? So multiple probabilities are there. Doesn't matter how password policy is strong. If they're compromised, and that's the case. What we've done is we've associated with an online repository. So this repository basically aggregates all password credentials that are compromised, all accounts that have been compromised day in, day out. They go all over the internet. They scrounge for any of these credential compromises. They go to the dark web, find out which of these applications were compromised, or which of the credentials were compromised, or which vendors got compromised. Any list that's out there, they bring that in, and they have a massive database of compromised credentials and passwords and user accounts. So what happens is, if one of those passwords got compromised like quite recently, so that goes into the have I been pawned database. And once this integration is in place, your users will not be able to set a password, though complex, will not be able to set a password if it was compromised in the past. So that makes the whole cycle 360-degree. Stop them from using dictionary words, stop them from using predictable patterns, don't let them use incremental passwords, and also stop them from using any password that got compromised in the past. And on top of it, you can always do it with passphrases, which is something that I would totally recommend. So the password policy strengthener is something that you can definitely look at if you're wanting to adhere to the NIST guidelines that I just gave you from a password security standpoint. Another guidelines is around password expiration. We were talking about why this can be counterintuitive. So password expiration, as they see it, can make the whole process a little unpredictable, because for years most of us have been encouraging passwords to be reset over and over, but then as users grow, as the number of identities grow, they start setting mediocre passwords. You just can't do anything about it. I personally have, like I told you, 10 different identities that I manage, and when I'm asked to reset my password over and over, I can't do it every month. 10 passwords every month accounts to almost about 120 different passwords over a span of a year. So how do I reset it every month? That's going to be really difficult for me, right? So that is where NIST steps in and say expiry can be a problem. So you have to deal it with a pinch of salt. It's absolutely up to you, because we've been used to the whole idea of resets. They've been working for us for quite some time now. If you're an Active Directory organization, this is quite critical. But what you can do is, instead of making the reset a complicated process, because what's the big deal with resets? You have to notify your users and they're going to reset their passwords. Now that we have these clear-cut established guidelines, that shouldn't also be a problem. If that's what you're thinking, your users tend to reuse the passwords, like I've already iterated. And if the credentials are stolen, they get used. That's something that we've established. The problem is when you try to notify your users about the expiry. So we've come to terms with the fact that this is how things are. Password expiry is something that we can't just neglect. So that's something that we have to work with. And the Microsoft way of reminding your users, what is it? It's just a pop-up. A pop-up that says the password is about to expire and asks your users to reset their password. Now, what's the innate response often user, when they see a pop-up, they don't even read it, they just close it. That's what we've all been conditioned to do. We never read pop-ups. So what's the big deal with pop-ups? So what we thought was we'll make it easy for the users. We'll get to the users wherever they are available. We'll show up on all those platforms where we think we can cut through the noise and notify them right on time, every time, and as many number of times as possible. Don't get me wrong, we are not spamming our users. Over communicating is absolutely okay, essentially because your users are also working remotely. Do notify them as many number of times as possible. And if you can set the password expiry notification up, you can mail them, you can send push notifications, you can send text notifications. In fact, I have some insider info for you. We are working on a system where if we can get WhatsApp and Slack integration in picture and notify users about their password resets via those platforms, it becomes a possibility, because all we want to do is reach the users and tell them that this is a problem. Now, if you're thinking, why is this a big deal? The answer is quite simple, because majority of help desk tickets today, as we speak, while users are working remotely, are for account unlocking and password resets. Now, this is something that you just can't battle right now. You have 100 other fights to fight, and if this is going to pile up and overload or overburden your help desk, that's something that you can completely avoid. And that's my recommendation too. So set up a very simple password expiry notification, like the one that I'm showing you right now, where they get a text message, where they get an email, where you can do time notifications, inform them in as many number of platforms as possible. Does make a lot of difference. And while we are doing it, while we are at it, how would it sound if we can do the whole thing self-service? Can we talk about password reset? Can we talk about account unlock all by themselves? Very simple, very straightforward. What if we can get it right to them, right where they'd be looking for it? So they forget their passwords on the logon screen. They want to unlock their lockdown accounts on the logon screen. Give them a button right there. And if you have a question as to how am I going to communicate the complex rules that we just set, because again, I don't want the user to pick up the phone and ask me what to adhere to or what are the complexity requirements. And that goes without saying, we got those rules listed right at the logon screen. So it makes it very easy for the user when they're trying to reset their password. And we're trying to reduce friction as much as possible, because we have to understand, bottom line, security is important. We can't kind of water down the whole security just because we are working remotely for the sake of accessibility. So make it easy for them and give them where they'd be looking for it. Because we've been discussing about password fatigue for quite some time now. People can't remember multiple passwords. And when you set a really complex password, it becomes difficult to remember that too. So we're trying to get that right balance in the picture. And how do we do it? Again, along those same lines, not letting them remember multiple passwords can be achieved with single sign-on. Now, this is a very different approach to single sign-on, unlike the usual one, just so that we ensure users don't fall prey for password fatigue. You can always implement single sign-on. And on top of it, there are multiple fringe benefits to implementing single sign-on. So the whole deal of access management is very clearly done through your platform. At any given point in time, you have control over who has access to what application. Multiple applications supported out of the box. Look for a solution that gives you such an integration. And on top of it, if you want like revoke access, you can always do. Generate reports, you can always do. And the best part right here is your users set complex passwords for their Active Directory. That's checkbox is done. And since they log in with their Active Directory credentials that are strong, the whole idea of having to re-enter their passwords for maybe their Zoho account or their Dropbox account is definitely not a problem. They don't fall prey for any of these attacks that are quite common. So single sign-on can be your redemption if you're thinking password fatigue is a problem. So they set a strong password for one of these accounts, you do a backend integration, and all that happens afterward is just single sign-on, and your users never really have to re-enter a credential. It's that straightforward and that easy. So my next recommendation to you would be to set up single sign-on for better access, for lesser password fatigue, and for straightforward tracking as to what your users are doing. And essentially, while working remotely, it does a great deal of help in load balancing. You'd have a very clear picture as to what or where is most of the load on your infrastructure and manage it accordingly. So another recommendation for you today. So through and through, I've given you quite a lot of recommendations, a handful to be precise. What I want to also give you is, put it out there, is a simple math. Most of us are in decision-making roles. We try to convince our organization, doesn't matter. So just a quick math for you, if in case you're in pursuit of or answering yourself as to why do you really need it. let's say 500 employees an organization, all right, or 20 calls made by a user. That's the industry average. So that sums up to almost about 10,000 calls that are made every year. And 30% of these calls are help desk calls for password resets. And that's a huge number. And now as we speak, this number has spiked up to 45%. That's an additional 50% increase, 15% increase. So that's something that you can totally get rid of if you only had a self-service portal. We just spoke about how simple it could be if your users can have a dashboard right at the logon screen from where they can do their self-service and call it a day. They don't have to pick the phone ever again for a password reset or an account unlock and still get the job done. So this does not just enable your users from a business continuity standpoint, enables the organization from a cost cutting standpoint too, because I speak to so many administrators and security leaders, and one common problem that I keep hearing about is budgets being frozen, IT budget. This is a great way to save quite a lot of money right there, and this is something that you can always take back and reiterate, or if you're in the process of evaluation, a good slide. If you want a screenshot, please do grab one right now. Lovely. Going forward, we have to talk about two-factor authentication. It goes without saying that there are too many variables in this equation as we speak while working remotely, and NIST guidelines also says the more you foolproof your system, the better chances that you can get yourself away from a security breach or a credential compromise. And the easiest guideline that you have for doing that foolproofing is the second factor of authentication. Do whichever one is preferable. There are a couple of guidelines that say don't use SMS verification for 2FA. Absolutely up to you. Not really the best approach. There are other ways to do it. Also very personalized knowledge factors, possession factors. You can use one of them rather than text messages, because you know how phones work. Notifications right on the screen. The OTP is available if someone also is close to the phone. So stuff like that. So evaluate whichever works for you, but you get to make the call at the end of the day, because you will need flexibility in terms of the options for implementation. And my recommendation to you would be to look for a solution that does not just do two-factor for applications or servers, but also does two-factor right at the very logon itself. How cool is that? So even if your credentials got compromised, you have these many different factors that you can establish, enable, let your users pass through, or get access only if they get through the second factor. It could be Google Authenticator, it could be Touch ID, it could be Face ID, it could even be Microsoft Authenticator. If you're on Azure, please use Microsoft Authenticator, the mobile app. It's absolutely free. Set it up. It takes no time to set it up. And in fact, if you just move to Office 365, head to the Secure Score dashboard. I'm repeating, Secure Score dashboard, and it gives you a very clear picture as to what is your current security posture. It does a complete full-fledged analysis on your entire security infrastructure and gives you recommendations on what is lacking. It gives you a checklist, essentially, the Secure Score dashboard. And almost all the times, the first recommendation is setting up multi-factor authentication, and it has a score of 50. That's on a base of maybe, let's say, on an average 500. So that's a huge deal of security top up that you're doing if you just had MFA. Why am I stressing so much? Let me show you an example. An administrator credential got compromised, all right? The attacker goes forward to use the password to log in. Let's see what happens. There's a wall that stops the attacker from going any further, though the attacker had the credential. Here, there's a second factor right at the logon, maybe a email verification code that gets sent, maybe a touch ID that is required, maybe a face ID that is required, maybe a time-based authenticator that's required, but then there is nevertheless a second factor of authentication, a wall that the attacker cannot pass through without having access to the second factor. And trust me, this is of great, not just administrator accounts and also in service accounts, the ones that get shared across multiple users. It becomes difficult to keep track. So if you can do a second factor, makes it foolproof. So we're talking about a very simple way, but a very effective way of foolproofing, which is setting up a second factor right at the logon. So that's the recommendation that I have for you. So far, we've covered a couple of recommendations. We saw why is it important to set self-service up, because it makes the whole load on the help desk come down. As a best practice, NIST has asked you to do longer passwords, do stronger passwords, passwords that aren't predictable dictionary words, and you can do that with the password policy enhancer or the enforcer. And notifications of password expiry can be done to neutralize the whole negative impact that it has on the help desk with the notifier. There's always single sign-on that helps you make it effortless from a password fatigue standpoint, and multi-factor authentication that makes it all the more easy for you to foolproof your entire system. All right. Along those lines, what I have for you is another top up to the authentication that we've been talking about. So this is what we've been working on right now here at Managed Engine. We've been working on an adaptive authentication module, something that can completely change the game as to how password security is dealt with or authentication is dealt with. So what we try to do is we try to leverage the machine learning prowess that we have. We have full-fledged in-house SIM solutions. We took inspiration from our SIM solution, got a machine learning module incorporated into our password management module, where every single user logon activity is analyzed or vetted against a baseline that's drawn. So every user has a personalized dynamic risk score or a risk profile for normal behavior. We take into account not just the whole idea of logon and authentication, but we take into account the idea of context, user location, the reputation of the IP from where they are logging in, the biometrics or the footprint of the device. Was it a device that they had used in the past? Was it a recognized IP address? Even while they're bringing their own device, was it registered or tagged in any of your machine learning runs? So we're talking about context at multiple levels. We have 13 different contextual parameters that get taken into account, and risk profiles get drawn for the users. Now, what's the big deal with risk profiles? So when an attacker gets hold of these credentials and tries to impersonate, what happens is they end up triggering all these alarms, because these are more like traps. So an attacker cannot simulate 100% the same context as that of a user, and the system picks that up and starts restricting the attacker from moving any further. You can cut out the session, you can lock the user out, you can make it difficult for the whole logon to go forward. If you want an extra factor of authentication, you can throw that in, because your users can be also accessing from different geographical location, from a different device. So we give that benefit of doubt. We give them more factors to authenticate through, and if they get through, they get successful access. So this is something that can change the game as to how password security has been handled. In fact, in the beginning of the webinar, we were talking about, can we go passwordless? If at all there's a passwordless future that's mildly possible, adaptive authentication will be your way through. For the time being, what we have done is we've clubbed this with passwords, and we're doing it in a hybrid model. You can set up passwords, you can also set up adaptive authentication, and you'd be able to enforce contextual policies to say who gets what level of access. Can they easily waltz into your account, into your accounts, or do they need to pass through multiple challenge questions or challenges before they get access? So that's another sneak peek that I wanted to give you as to what we are working on in our research lab. So adaptive authentication is something that we're working on. And along those lines, as we speak, there is a huge shift in the industry per se. We've been talking about remote work enough. So it's not just during the time of the pandemic or the whole situation right now are people going to work remotely, because as we see it, as we've discussed, a lot of leaders around the world are pro remote work. They're saying even after the pandemic, even after the whole situation passes, still a big chunk of your users are going to be working remotely, and we can see that all the time. We keep hearing that in the last couple of months. So what we've done is we wanted to give your users the same experience. Even if they're working remotely, they get the same experience, the same set of functionalities, no compromise. So when a user is trying to make, let's say, a password reset request or an account unlock request, it looks very simple. The reset request is done, the reset is successfully done and incorporated back. But then at the back end, while your users are working from home, a lot happens. The weightlifting is done by AD360, the tool that we've been discussing through the day. All the functionalities are a part of AD360. The tool stands between the user and the identity platform and does all the pre-checks or pre-authentications before actually transferring a request from the user to the respective identity platform. So here, if a request is made for a reset, AD360 takes the request, verifies or validates the user with a couple of challenge questions, and then once it's successful, the request gets relayed, the request gets incorporated, it gets taken back, and it gets applied on the user's endpoint. This is just one half of the journey if it's a password reset request. There's verified cached credentials that need to be overwritten too for the logon to be successful, for the connection to be successful. And that is also done in the background through a secure VPN tunnel. So through and through, the only requirement that's required right here, if you're having in mind a question, how can someone who's forgotten their password reset their password from the logon screen while they're not connected to the corporate network? You can answer that with this simple explanation where any system above Windows 8 can be plugged to the internet or tethered to a Wi-Fi connection without a logon. All we need is an active internet connection. 8360 will be internet facing, do all the weightlifting for you and get the whole reset job done, and very securely too. If you have a couple of we support out of the box a ton of VPN providers. If you have your own VPN provider not listed right here, you can bring that and we can have that hooked to the system too. So we're talking about a scenario where remote working need not be as difficult as it could probably be. So give them the same level of experience. That's the crux, because we are still battling experience or usability versus security, and we want to make it as easy as possible. And in the process of making things easy, what we've done is we've also put together a simple Authenticator app for users across your organization. A self-service of a password reset, a self-unlock, using that as an authentication for Touch ID, OTP, text verifications, and configuring the whole thing is quite simple, and getting your users enrolled on it is also quite simple. So if you're looking for a solution for self-service, or if you're looking to incorporate the recommendations that NIST is given, it's all pre-built in the solution, and you also have a mobile version for it. That is the idea. I'm going to quickly sum up what we've discussed so far. You've got all of that listed right here. NIST recommendations starting with self-service portal, being able to unlock their own accounts, being able to self-reset their passwords, and support to multiple directories is definitely something that you need to look into, because we're talking about a situation where it's not just on-prem. A lot of what we are doing is on the cloud right now. If you can tether all of that together, that would be absolutely fantastic. And going forward, yes, remote resets, being notified rightly, setting up a secure multi-factor authentication, notifying the users about their impending password resets, single sign-on, and the password filtering that we try to do with password databases, where we stop users from using insecure passwords. So all of these NIST recommendations for password securities clubbed under one tool, 8360, for which we've put together a couple of resources. If you want to fast track into setting it up, or you want to know more about what can you do to extend your support to remote employees, or double up your security, or understand how attacks are happening today, you can very much write to me and I'd be more than happy to share these resources. Also, on top of it, what we have done is we've made the whole tool available for access for public. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to do our bit right here in helping administrators get to speed. So if you're one of those organizations who's working remotely, and if you honestly feel that you have a requirement right now to go remote and enable yourself, what we want to do is we want to help you with the tool. We will give you access to the tool and we'll help you set up. We have a 200-member team that's essentially enabling remote organizations around the world as we speak. Let me quickly drop the link to the tool on chat right now. Just a quick second. I'm trying to get hold of the chat, and I've dropped it to you on the chat. So you can use this link in case if you want to access the tool and get this tool and set it up. And on top of it, what I'd recommend personally is I'd want to talk to you. I'd want to understand what challenges are you facing right now. We want to be by your side when you do it. We've put together a couple of resources. We've got 100 days of experience remote working. We've spoken and consulted, spoken to a lot of people around the world, and we've got so much insights through and through the process, which I'd love to share with you guys, just in case if you're in the pursuit of going remote and setting up the NIST recommendations for password policies. Guys, you've been such a lovely audience. Thank you so much for patiently tuning into the session. It means a lot to us. Do write to me. Jay Reddy is my name. jreddy@managingenieur is my email. Do write to me with your questions. If you have any requests pertaining to the resources that I was just talking about, the NIST cybersecurity framework, if you need that, write to me. The presentation deck, the video, if you have any questions at all pertaining to identity access management, you can always write to me and I'd be very quick and prompt to respond to your emails. Thank you so much for having taken the time. All I ask is just one small request. Do stay safe. All of you are very, very important to us. Please do take care of yourselves. Please do stay safe. And I honestly hope the next time when we meet under better circumstances, and the whole pandemic is a thing of the past, and everything else that's happening around the world as we speak are much behind us, and we beat under better circumstances and better times. That being said, I'm available at this email ID. Do drop me a message or an email. Thank you so much. You've been such a lovely audience. You have a great rest of the week ahead. Thank you so much, guys.